Hey everybody, welcome to welcome to Vinyl Fetish. I have a bottle of Buffalo Trace whiskey in my hand. There are not corporate sponsors. Buffalo Trace and a little bit of ginger ale, especially if you're listening to some good blue jazz. Oh, that's good, because it's hot up here. I'm back up here in the sweaty vinyl attic to bring you another installment of 100 albums that matter. 100 albums that you should have in your collection if you're a true vinyl aficionado. And last week we did a fairly recent album, the Lana Del Rey 2019 Norman fucking Rockwell. And Andy was up here to help us. Now we're going to go a little bit farther in the past. We're going to go all the way back to 1959. And the thing about classic music or classic film is there's always more and more in the past. We keep moving forward in time, and so there's just more stuff. Like classic movies now include movies from the 1990s like Titanic. So there's always this backlog of stuff. When I bought my first copy of the Beatles' White Album, it was in 1978, and the White Album wasn't even 10 years old yet. So there's always more, and sometimes the stuff that goes back over 50 years gets left behind. So we're really going to go back, but we're going to go back into what we could argue is the greatest album of all time. Miles Davis, 1959, Kind of Blue. This is an original mono pressing that I picked up in the early 80s, and it's now going for over 600 bucks on eBay. And I want to talk about this record. I'm going to talk about it, why people love it so much, but most importantly, I want to kind of relate it to the concept of innovation. What does it mean to be innovative? Because this is a record that really broke the mold, not just for jazz music, but for music in general. So just a little bit of background on this record. It comes out is recorded in 1959. In 2 sessions. Interestingly, the songs on the first side were recorded in 1 session in April. So What, Freddie Freeloader, and Blue and Green. And the songs on the second side, Flamenco Sketches and All Blues, were recorded the following month, in May of 1959, and came out in later 1959. This record features what was seen as the premier lineup in jazz. You have Miles Davis on trumpet, Cannonball Adderley, the great saxophone player, John Coltrane, which we were going to talk about, as well as Bill Evans playing the piano. Except for one song, Freddie Freeloader has the great Wynton Kelly on keyboards. But Bill Evans, it was a big deal that Miles Davis had this white cat in his jazz band. So there was a lot of flack, but Bill Evans playing on this is amazing and very important. And then Jimmy Cobb on drums and Paul Chambers on bass. This record is really a collaboration with Miles Davis and John Coltrane. They had recorded about 10 albums before this together, and were really playing off and pushing each other in the evolution. So if you know about the history of jazz, we have bebop, which is kind of the era of Charlie Parker, and Miles Davis was in Charlie Parker's band, and Coltrane was a fan. In fact, a couple years ago, Andy and I were in Greenwich Village at the Blue Note seeing McCoy Tyner, who was the great pianist with John Coltrane, and sitting in the spot where a young John Coltrane sat watching Charlie Parker play, inspiring him. Miles Davis did his tutelage with Charlie Parker, bebop, and then we went into the kind of post-bop or hard bop, where they were moving away from the sort of riffing on the simple melodies and bringing in more rhythmic elements, and that was sort of the music of the 1950s. And then 1959, everything breaks loose. 1959 are so many important albums, everything from Ornette Coleman to the Dave Brubeck Quartet and Take 5. Just even Duke Ellington had a really important record out in 1959. In fact, I'll include in the description the Spotify link to this, but also my Jazz 1959 playlist, all the great albums that came out in 1959. It's really a pivotal year. But this record really changed things, because this is sort of known as the first modal jazz album. I don't know if you've ever heard that term, modal jazz. It really sort of changed things. And what modal jazz essentially is, it's not too complicated, but instead of playing based on chords, you're playing based on a set of notes. You could say, oh, this song is going to have these 7 notes in it. All these white keys are going to be in this song, and we're just going to riff around these 7 notes. And maybe 12 bars in, we'll change it to another 7 notes. But the idea is that it gives the artist these colors, this palette of these specific notes to play in, and it sort of forces them to be more creative. Miles had experimented with this on a song on the album before this, the title track from Milestones in 1958 that also has Coltrane on it, but it really changed the sound of jazz. So in a way, this record is post-pop. It starts the broader experimentation with modal jazz, and the next album that Coltrane records after this one is Giant Steps, which came out in early 1960. Giant Steps is seen as being one of the most innovative jazz albums of all time, playing within these modes of notes, and basically opens up the door for the 60s and all the crazy things that happened in the 1960s. When you listen to this record, it's interesting that So What, the first track, bum bum, you know, you have this great riff from Bill Evans, bum bum, bum bum. It's kind of the most famous song off this record. But if you go on Spotify, you'll see there's about 60 something million streams of So What, and almost twice as many of the track Blue and Green, which is the shortest track on the album, but it's also a very romantic ballad. And I have to think that there's a lot of contemporary people that don't listen to this whole album that are just like, I need a nice little dinner music or some seduction music with Miles on the trumpet, so I'm going to play Blue and Green. But what's really interesting is the side 2 of this record, which doesn't get as much attention because the side 2 is these 2 very long tracks, all blues and flamenco sketches that are very different from side 1. And side 2 is where you really hear Coltrane become Coltrane. You see the evolution of Coltrane into this modal jazz saxophonist. And if you listen to this album, you can listen to it as a Miles Davis record. Here's the trumpet, you know, he's playing all these great riffs, and he's being pushed by Coltrane. It's kind of like Lennon and McCartney. You know, they're really sort of competing with each other, who can play the best on this record, as they had been doing in the 10 previous albums. But on side 2, you get the Coltrane that everybody loves. And when I listen to this record, sometimes I listen to it on headphones while I'm riding my bike, and I like to listen to it just as a John Coltrane record. You can listen to it as a Bill Evans record or a Cannonball Adderley record. Most people listen to it as a Miles record. But if you just focus on the modal playing of Coltrane, it will blow your mind. And so for that reason and many others, this has been seen as the best-selling jazz album of all time, one of the 100 great albums of all time, one of the top 10. You know, it's just it gets all these accolades. And I've been trying to focus on albums that are kind of off that list, but this is a record that should be a key part of your collection. And it's also influenced people outside of jazz. Not only did it cause a revolution in jazz, Duane Allman of the Allman Brothers has said this record inspired the solos on songs like In Memory of Elizabeth Reed. Rick Wright of Pink Floyd talked about how this album influenced a lot of the music and his playing on Dark Side of the Moon, especially the track Breathe. There's all kinds of ramifications for how this record changed how we put a bunch of notes together. So, Kind of Blue, 1959. This record came out when Coltrane was already starting to grow in the late 1950s. He put out Blue Train, which is his great Blue Note album from 1958 that was, you know, really got a lot of attention. And then after Giant Steps came out, he was kind of off on his own. He took some of these players along with him, including Jimmy Cobb and Paul Chambers, to make some of those great records that the core of the Miles Davis quintet stayed together to make some of the best music that came out in the early 60s, and it gave Coltrane the chance to really grow. So the question about this is, you know, we try to have a little sociological question. Where does innovation come from? What does it mean to be innovative? And here we're asking the question, do you have to be in the form to break the form? Do you have to study and personify some particular idea about an art form to break from it? And if you look at the history of Picasso, I mean, all the great artists who were seen as sort of innovative did time doing kind of standard work. Think about the Beatles in Hamburg getting their 10,000 hours in playing Chuck Berry songs and playing Buddy Holly songs and all the songs they cut their teeth on that allowed them to then break the mold. I often think, do I want my daughter to be raised in a particular religion, not because I want her to subscribe to that religion, but I want her to be able to rebel against it. You have to have that form. So does innovation require that you actually are in a form to rebel against it, that you kind of know how things work? And I think a lot of people who listen to music think they're going to start off as innovators. I'm going to start off like all these great people that I love and just create things that have never been heard before. But all of them, including Coltrane and Miles Davis, started playing very standard stuff. I mean, in the mid-50s, Coltrane was literally playing the standards. And so you have to go to school. You have to do your 10,000 hours. You have to pay your dues. So then you have the tools to reject it. And so for people who want to be just automatically innovative, I think what we get when we listen to records like Kinda Blue, and so many of the great things that we love, there was time that was spent in the trenches, spent in the musical trenches, spent in the art trenches, spent in the literature trenches, doing the standard stuff, and then you have permission and the tools to break the rules. So that's just a little encouraging note about the role that conformity plays in innovation. That we got to kind of do things by the rules so we can then break the rules. All right, I hope you liked that quick little jazz lesson on modal jazz and the role of Coltrane and Miles Davis and the evolution of all music on earth. This is one of the greatest things you could ever have in your collection. You can get a reissued version on high quality vinyl. If you're lucky, you can find it in a used record bin, but this is sort of one of the best of the best. Next week, we are going to be looking at an album by The Clash. We're going to look at not London Calling, not Combat Rock, but what fell right between those two, which is Sandinista. We're going to talk about the Clash album Sandinista next week. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up. We'd really love you to subscribe to this channel because we're doing these 100 albums, so you'll want to see what's next so you can get all 100 of them. And we're glad to have you. These records matter, especially this one. This record matters. This music matters. You matter. So let's talk about it.